All right, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. Before we get started with the lecture, I do want to make a couple quick announcements. You may recall that we had a one of those group assignment discussions. I sent out some email instructions kind of regarding what that is for this unit. Just to remind everyone, that is due on Monday, which is today at 11:59 p.m. You can either submit it to the file submission assignment, or you can also submit it to the I believe it's 717 2020 Dropbox. It's just an assignment inside of Canvas. If you go to the assignments, you should be able to see it. So most of the people who are here probably attended Friday's lecture and they don't have to worry about it. But if you're watching this later, or maybe you missed Friday, certainly make sure you do that. Yeah, it's something that's very important. It's 25% of your grade. And just to remind everyone, it's not about, if you're right or wrong. There is no right or wrong on it. It's an opinion question. I'm not grading you on your opinion. It's a completion grade. If you submit it, you get 100. If you don't submit it, well, you don't get 100, that's for sure. Any questions about that?
I have a question, but it's not about that.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I saw for exam one, you have like 2 exam one grades and then an exam one raw, and then I see like 1 exam one grade.
Okay, so you're asking.
Yeah, I see 1 exam one grade has like out of 100. The other one has out of 56, and the exam raw, I think that one's out of 100. So I was like, but I thought you said, it's only 1 grade for the exam, so I was kind of wondering about that.
Yeah, great question. So basically, the way that Canvas does the quizzes is that it's going to go ahead and put it in the grade book. But I want to go ahead and add a curve to that before I actually do anything to it. So that's what the exam one raw is. Basically, what I do is I only work in percentages. I don't do points for anything. So I go ahead and convert it to a percentage and then add a curve to it. And then finally, the only grade that I actually look at for grade calculations is going to be inside of the exam 1, exam 2, and exam 3. So those are the only ones that are going to be used to calculate your grade. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the one like out of 100.
I'm not sure if it says it's out of 100 or not.
One exam, not the exam raw, but like you have 2 exams ones, and one of them is like one is out of 100 points, and the other one is out of 56 points. I guess because there were 56 questions.
Yeah, so the one that's out of 56 is probably just from Canvas whenever I made the quiz. That's how it has it in there.
Oh, okay, but you're going off of the 1 out of 100.
Exactly,
one.
Yeah.
Okay, I got you.
So basically, the only difference between the raw score and the exam 1 score is that the exam 1 score includes any bonus points you earned on exam 1. So it should be higher.
Okay, I got you.
Okay, any other questions?
And so it's not going to be, the other 2, they aren't going to be included with our grade.
Yeah, the other 2 aren't factored in at all. Canvas may have it to where you see some sort of grade it calculates, but that's not how I calculate your grade, and that's not how, it doesn't necessarily follow the syllabus. Canvas is really kind of difficult to work with in terms of calculating grades. So what I do is after every exam, I just calculate everyone's grade manually. It's much easier. And we will cover in next unit in the business analytics chapter about how to actually calculate a grade. So it's really easy. If you're really wanting to calculate grades, I've got it posted on my YouTube from last semester. So certainly feel free to check that out as well.
Okay. But, gotcha.
Yeah. Any other questions? Oh my gosh. Kyle, you're unmuted. You're going to ask something?
No, I'm good here. Hold on.
Gotcha. No worries. So just to remind everyone as well, I did send out a survey to everyone. It's completely optional. It's not factored into your grade in any way. It's fully anonymous, but it's to kind of get some feedback from everyone and see, what I'm doing well, what I could improve on. Particularly, if you want to give me some suggestions, that'd be really helpful to me. I would greatly appreciate it. Like I said, it is fully optional, though. It's not factored into your grade in any way. So with that out of the way, we're going to talk about social computing. But before I do, I've got a really good joke I've been saving. Well, it's not really a joke, but it's a funny story. So you can tell I'm wearing a blue and white striped shirt today. And, I'm in my new office. So one of the requirements for being on campus now, if you're inside of a campus building, for the most part, you have to wear a mask. And, I didn't wear it outside or anything. I didn't wear it in my car, but as soon as I got in the building, I put it on. Well, I went to the restroom earlier, and I think you guys will like this. I looked in the mirror, and look at the color coordination I've got going on today. I just thought it was kind of funny. Really doesn't relate much to social computing at all. But yeah, that's kind of a funny way to get class started there. So let's go ahead and talk about this. So before we go in and talk about the specific context, I want to kind of add this in to the discussion that we had Friday regarding, security vulnerabilities and regulations and stuff like this. This is an article about the Google Plus breach, which was a breach in which basically information that was on Google Plus was, in some ways accessed by third parties who weren't intended to access it. And Google actually held off on notifying the public and notifying their shareholders and notifying government agencies that this occurred for several weeks. And they actually gave their reasoning because they feared regulation. So again, I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong, but regulation is something that many businesses in particular would be hesitant to be supportive of. And again, we kind of see evidence of that when we look at something like Porter's Five Forces, where that's going to be a barrier to entry. It's also not just going to be a barrier to entry, though. It's also going to make the cost of the product or service more expensive. You could argue that some regulations can make things cheaper, but, you look at the cost of producing it, if it were truly beneficial. A lot of market analysts and market theories would argue that they would have already done it. So again, I'm not saying that's correct or accurate in every case, but that's some of the common arguments here. So I think it's an interesting story. Certainly, we're talking about social networks. This is a big social network breach. Last week, Twitter was breached. Several very high-profile Twitter accounts were hacked, including numerous politicians, former politicians, as well as Twitter's own support handle. So that sort of thing is something that happens a lot. And it's something that's no stranger to the social networking sites. So this is kind of an interesting little story there. But what we're going to be talking about today is social computing, and specifically looking at social computing in the context of businesses, showing how they use it, what it is, and, why they use it. So we're also going to look at things like social shopping, collaborative consumption, all that sort of thing, as well as how marketing plays a role in all this. So we're going to skip the survey for today. But we're going to talk about, specifically the technologies that make social computing possible. So probably the most basic technology I could really talk about here today is a tag. And a tag could be like a hashtag, could also be a tag that you put at the end of an article to kind of help search engines find it better. But the whole purpose behind this is to really aid in information retrieval. So when we have information retrieval, we can more easily find the information down the road. And these are quite common on social networks. We talked about hashtags being used. I've got the Twitter example right there. It's very common. But really, pretty much every social network uses hashtags in some way, shape, or form. We have this idea of real simple syndication. That's going to be whenever we compile, kind of short snippets of an article. And it allows us to have access to a lot of different headlines and maybe just like one or two sentences about what the article is about. And it kind of allows us to have that from a multitude of sources. So maybe we could have a news RSS feed, and we subscribe to various different news outlets. Maybe we subscribe to some, just to kind of get a wide viewpoint about what's going on in the world. And that's certainly one thing you could do. And that's really all it is to it. It's just the idea of compiling different sorts of published articles in a kind of standardized format. So you're not limited to one particular company's product or service. You can instead use this inside of a more general way. It's basically a standard. So that's another web technology. The whole principle of a blog, something where people kind of share maybe stuff that's about their hobby, maybe it's about their life, just lots of information that people are interested in. And it's basically just a web page of some sort. Maybe there's some pictures on it. You get the idea. It's kind of contrasted by a microblog, where instead of having, pages, maybe it's just like a short little snippet, maybe, like the Twitter example here. Of course, Twitter's not the only example of a microblog, but they're certainly the most common. And then that contrasts with a wiki. So in a wiki, in most cases, anyone can edit it. There's exceptions to that, of course, but for the most part, we're talking about a wiki site. We have these sites where basically anyone can go edit them. Wikipedia, of course, being one of the most famous examples, but that's not the only example of a wiki. I mean, they're quite common for like internal documentation. They're common for, having a thing that's kind of specialized to some sort of a hobby or some sort of a interest of people. They're quite a common thing because they allow for collaboration, and they allow for things like tracking, contributions, tracking all sorts of things like that. So I've got a cartoon here, and if someone will do me a favor and read that off for me.
Dude, you're not tweeting, are you? No, I'm checking in on Foursquare. Tweeting in the bathroom would be weird.
Yeah, so that's a kind of, I don't know if it's that funny, but I think it's moderately funny at least, to kind of talk about, using the correct tool for the correct thing. This cartoon right here, or comic, that's what I'm looking for. This comic right here really kind of does a great example of kind of showing, where you would use the correct tool. So in this case, you use Foursquare to check in. You're using location-based sorts of information, and you're sharing that. I'm in the restroom. You check into the restroom, but you wouldn't tweet from the restroom according to this. Now, I don't know if you tweet from the restroom or not, but this is just kind of a humorous thing, and it kind of shows how different social networks have different purposes. What you would post on Facebook, maybe you wouldn't post on LinkedIn. What you would post on LinkedIn, maybe you wouldn't post to your Twitter page. I mean, there's lots of different social networks out there, and they each serve a somewhat distinct purpose. Now, imagine if they all serve the same purpose. It'd be quite difficult to really justify using more than one or two of them. And that would probably cause some issues. It would make it very difficult to have a new market entrant and enter the market. So when we're kind of thinking about this, we want to think in that context of, does it make sense to use it for this purpose? So, and another thing that makes it difficult for a new social network to enter, in addition to the fact they have to have some sort of unique purpose, is there's also this idea of a network effect. So that is to say that your social network, as it gains users, it'll become more and more valuable. So that's going to flip side to whenever you gain a certain amount of users, the marginal benefit of a new user is very small, if not non-existent. So that is to say that if you had a social network with, say, I don't know, 1 billion users on it, adding or subtracting one user is not going to have a very large marginal impact. Whereas if you have a social network that's starting out and it's, increasing in size, each of those marginal new users is going to have a pretty substantial impact, and it's going to provide a lot of benefits to the firm in terms of having something that's valuable, something that has some reach to it. So that's beneficial from that perspective, but there's some drawbacks, and of course the main one being that it makes it very difficult to get a new entrant into the social networking area, because would you want to join a social network if on the entire website they had maybe, I don't know, a couple 100,000 users, and then they had maybe only 2 or 3 people Someone answer that. Would you join
Usually for like websites for social networks, like, well, really for applications, even like for like Instagram, you can have like public or private accounts. So usually a lot of companies, like let's say Coca-Cola, would go public so that it would filter through to a mass audience so they could get a lot of followers, because that's how they're trying to, that's one of the ways they communicate with their customers, for example.
So, kind of back to Kyle's point, I mean, you want to communicate with a large amount of people. If you only know 2 or 3 people on the social network, it's probably not going to do you a whole lot of good. You might as well, text the people, email them, whatever you would do, that's probably going to be a more effective way. So the network effect, it really kind of serves as a huge barrier to entry. And that's why we haven't seen very many new social networks since the rise of, the massive social media companies we know today. I think TikTok is relatively new, but again, I'm not recommending it. There's certainly a lot of controversy surrounding kind of its founding and all that. But, for the most part, it's very difficult for a social network to really kind of take off and, Earlier on, maybe it was a lot easier, but today we have established market for that, and it's very difficult to become a part of that market. And you also have the whole kind of premise is that you're sharing information. So going back to the last chapter, and really even before that, we talked about information privacy. We talked about how do you make sure that your information is being private. Well, on a social network, you have some options there. You can either go into your settings, select who can view your content, but then beyond that, you probably also would want to carefully monitor what you're sharing in the first place. Anything that could be used against you down the road, or maybe even in the immediate, is probably not something you'd want to share publicly. So, whether or not you trust those information sharing settings, it's important to monitor carefully what you're putting on there. So, but that's really the whole premise is, you can share ideas, you can share, sales if you're a firm, if you're an individual, maybe you could share some news about your life, whatever you want to share, you can. And, what really makes this a very valuable tool is the idea that you can share it with thousands of people at a time, maybe millions of people at a time if you're a large firm with a huge social media following. And you can't do that with a lot of other ways. I mean, you could sit at your computer, type out a quick tweet, and millions of people could view it. So it's a very beneficial thing from that perspective. Of course, the flip side is, what if you accidentally tweeted out something? That could be a problem. So it's all about a balance here. You want to make sure that you look at the advantages of it and look at the disadvantages of it. But in addition to having, the public sorts of social networks, there's also going to be this whole concept of having these enterprise social networks. And these are also going to be public, but they're going to be for company-related things. The book lists LinkedIn as an example of an enterprise social network. I don't know that I'd consider it one, because it's not tied to any particular company. It is owned by Microsoft, of course, but beyond that, it's not really for any one company. Any company can go use it. I would instead think of enterprise social network as being something that's, like almost as if it's a sort of blog for employees to share information publicly on. Lots of tech companies in particular have these sorts of sites where the employees may post some stories about how to use their products. Maybe they'd post some different product updates. Whatever the case may be, that'd be what I consider more to be an enterprise social network. So it's a slight little disagreement I'd have with the author there. But beyond that, there's going to be public facing. And in contrast, if we look at something like a corporate social network, that's going to be something that's for company use only. It's not going to be public facing. In other words, if you're not an employee of the company, you can't access the corporate social network that they're using. Some examples of this could be things like Slack, could be things like Yammer, different products. Microsoft Teams is another example of this, where basically it's a corporate social network that is only open to people within the corporation, basically. So that's the main distinction there. Enterprise social network is going to be public, corporate social network is going to be private. Let's also talk about social commerce, though. So we talked about social media some and, kind of its basic uses. Y'all are probably pretty familiar with that, I'd like to think. If you're not, there's not many questions on the test about, social media. But, the whole idea behind social commerce is the exchange of goods and services online. And it's very beneficial because, as we talked about in, which chapter was that? I'm pretty sure it's chapter 7, where we talked about, the whole concept of disintermediation. It reduces barriers to entry, online shopping, e-commerce, e-business. That's going to reduce the barriers to entry. Well, this is what social commerce is. Only we're kind of throwing in a more social aspect to it. So it's the same kind of concept. So it's very beneficial for the firm to engage in this because it's very cost effective for them to do. The flip side is that, other firms could also then compete. And you're going to have a lot more rivalry if we think back to Porter's 5 forces. As you reduce those barriers to entry, new market forces are likely going to, kind of join. New firms are going to start up. Maybe existing firms may start to kind of encroach into our market territory. So that's going to be a major disadvantage of this. And, we also want to think about, the Pareto principle or the 20-80 rule, where we don't want to be in a situation where 20% of our users are contributing 80% of the content, or 20% of our, customers are buying 80% of our product. And, that's kind of a strange thing to say. Why would we not want that? Well, imagine that one customer was responsible for, say, 50% of your sales. and then that one customer becomes upset, you just lost half your sales. So in general, you'd want to kind of avoid that, but it's not necessarily something you can avoid. We also see that principle in things like, contributions from users. So if we had let's say we had a Facebook page, we would probably see about 20% of our users post the vast majority of the content on that Facebook page. Maybe they'd say, "Man, I'm really loving this product," or "Man, this new thing is really great." Whatever they would say, that's what we'd see with a 20/80 rule. Any questions so far? Certainly feel free to jump in with any questions at any time. But then, beyond that, we're not just limited to having companies kind of engage in social commerce. There's also this idea of having the sharing economy. And in the sharing economy, what we have is this whole concept of collaborative consumption. That is to say that, I don't want to use the term sharing the assets, but one person owns the asset, and they essentially, exchange use of that asset in exchange for some sort of, money, some sort of other method of payment, whatever that could be. And that's what collaborative consumption is. Great examples of this, things like Uber. Uber, the company, doesn't own most of their cars. I do believe they have some sort of autonomous vehicles, but for the most part, they don't own the cars. They don't have employees. Well, they do have employees, but most of the drivers are not employees, they're contractors. And that's what collaborative consumption is. Same thing with Airbnb. Airbnb, for the most part, doesn't own most of their listings. They maybe have, people who, list their places on there, and then, in turn is sold. You could probably make an argument that Zillow's in a similar sense, where Zillow, the company, doesn't actually own any of their real estate listings. That'd be a bit of a murkier example, but it certainly could be something made where basically the company that is, kind of engaging in the transaction, they're really only the intermediary. And that's an interesting concept, and it's something that, is really kind of taken off over the past 10 years. So again, I wouldn't necessarily use the term share for their resources, but basically just know that what's happening is that in exchange for use, you're getting money. That's really what it's about, capital. So that's kind of the whole concept here. Any questions about that? Okay, so in addition to kind of having this concept of social commerce, sharing economy, there's also the idea of social shopping. And social shopping really kind of manifests itself in, lots of different ways. The two primary ways, though, are having things like customer reviews present, where basically a customer has the ability to review a product, say what they liked about it, say what they didn't like about it, maybe share some pictures, maybe sometimes even video. And just kind of have a lot of input into, what they thought about the product. And the whole concept is that these reviews are not edited. They're not removed based on their content. Anything like that, as long as they post something that's legal, it's not supposed to be removed. And that's per a lot of the FTC regulations. But unfortunately, that's not something that's always followed. So you have to be careful with online reviews. The whole concept is that if you are reading reviews and it sounds kind of suspicious, maybe it's similar to all the other reviews, maybe the language is kind of not where you'd expect it to be. Lots of things like that. Those could be red flags. Maybe the review is not a legitimate review. So that's something to watch out for. Having reviews that are done in exchange for a free product, maybe even in exchange for payment. Those tend to rate the products and services a little bit higher than they would otherwise. So it's not going to be a very beneficial thing. But you could still get information. So you don't necessarily want to only go by reviews, but certainly take them into account could be a good approach. Then there's also the concept of group shopping. And in group shopping, what happens is that there's these different kinds of groups of people, and they're not necessarily closely associated. But the whole concept is that if enough people purchase a product or service, the price will adjust. So if we think about a traditional market, if we had huge amounts of demand, what would happen? Someone jump in here and tell me what happens to the price of a product with large amounts of demand.
The price will go up.
That's exactly correct. The price would rise. But with the group shopping, we have these sorts of flash deals where maybe if 1,000 people buy the product, the price is, $20. And if, 10,000 people buy it, the price may drop to like $19. And the whole concept is is that they want to use that as an approach to kind of entice people to share the deal with their friends who maybe are looking for something similar. Now, the flip side of that is you can be really annoyed by people who are like, hey, check out this deal on whatever. That can certainly get annoying very quickly. So I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, but just that's kind of the pros and cons there.
I have a question.
Okay.
Companies remove like inappropriate reviews, or if they can't, who does?
So, it depends on what you mean by inappropriate. If it's like an illegal review or if it's a fraudulent review, companies can remove it. If it's a review that the company doesn't like, then they would probably be best advised to follow, sort of the FTC guidelines for that and probably not remove it.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Could you just like block the person or the person from making a review again?
If it's a case of spam, like maybe they're saying, I don't know, I've certainly seen a lot of these lately where they're like, check on this link for, ways to make $10,000 a week or something ridiculous like that. Yeah, you could definitely block that. That wouldn't be an issue. The thing is imagine that someone was dissatisfied with a product and they did purchase a product. They have a receipt for the product, and they purchase it and then they use it for a bit and they say, I'm really not happy with it. They write a negative review. To my knowledge and to my understanding of what the FTC guidelines are, you can't remove that review. But if someone posts a review that's fraudulent, they didn't actually purchase a product, they're not even reviewing the right product. I mean, there are cases in which they can be removed. It just can get companies in a lot of trouble if they're moving legitimate reviews. So again, if there's any sort of illegal content within the review, of course, that can be removed. Any sort of spam content, that can be removed. But just in terms of having a negative review, that's probably something they wouldn't want to remove. Any other questions? Certainly some good questions. And I'll try to find that FTC guideline to kind of send out, maybe just have a little bit more information about it, because that is an interesting thing. It's not anything I've ever looked into in great detail. So let's kind of talk about marketing. I'm sure we've got some marketing majors in this class. So with social media, we have the option to do a lot of advertising on social media. We could advertise on our own page, talk about what sort of products and services we're offering. Maybe if we have a new thing, maybe we have a sale, we want to kind of send that information out to people in a cost-effective way. It's probably the most cost-effective way to do it. You spend a couple minutes posting something on various social media accounts. That could really draw in a lot of business. But beyond that, we could also contact the various social networks and maybe do some advertising, especially for people who are likely to be within our target audience, or whoever our target customers are, rather. So for example, if we're a makeup company or some sort of cosmetic company, we may want to target people who are likely to buy cosmetic products. You probably wouldn't want to target someone like me who's pretty unlikely to buy cosmetic products. I think that goes without saying. Selling me makeup's not going to be very easy because I wouldn't buy it. So, you want to make sure that you're doing that sort of thing. And that's where social networks can be a very beneficial thing. They have lots of information about their users. They can look at me and tell, pretty unlikely to buy makeup. Whereas, I may be more likely to buy other products or services. Maybe I'm more likely to buy, tennis rackets, tennis balls, running shoes, that sort of thing. So maybe the social networks will be able to, kind of suggest their advertisers, hey, you should maybe consider, looking at these. And so they can get a kind of a very targeted approach. This kind of goes back to the digital dossier that we talked about in, I think it was chapter 3. That's where this all kind of comes together. The information you put out there can and will be used. So, but beyond that, you can also do things like market research. We talked earlier about doing things like sentiment analysis on posts that mention your company. That's certainly something you could do. But then beyond that, you can look at your competitors. You're not just limited to your own company. Because the information is publicly available, you could also look and see how your competitors are doing. If they launch a new product, you can kind of monitor, what is the social network saying about it? Are they saying this is a great product? Are they not talking about it at all? Is that the only thing they're talking about? There's lots of different approaches you could take there. And that's kind of goes into the whole concept of what all information can you get from social media. I mean, you could also do things like post a poll. That's not necessarily something that people are likely to take the time to fill out. They could, but you'd probably have, self-selection bias where you may only have the two extremes kind of fill it out. So people who really like the product that you release, they may say, this is a great product, you should keep offering it. And people who don't like it, they may share some opinions kind of regarding that. So there's a lot of different approaches to that, but it's kind of the main things kind of regarding marketing use of this. But in addition to that, we can also use, social computing and other online tools for things like human resources. So, just the basic thing, how do we recruit applications? Or how do we recruit applicants? You don't recruit applications, of course. You could post the sites, you could post the job openings on various websites like LinkedIn, maybe even your Facebook page, your Twitter page for the company, of course. They could certainly post those positions. Also things like onboarding, getting that training done. It could be done with a, corporate social network where they have different modules and different kind of sections and documents and stuff for people to look through. That's well within what a lot of companies are doing. That kind of goes into employee development. We're making sure that our employees are kind of having, the knowledge about what our company's doing. That's going to be things like using a wiki, using internal documentation, and maybe even a corporate social network again. But then beyond that, certainly doing things like job searching. So if we have some sort of a network, especially like LinkedIn, we can easily search for jobs available in our area if we're a company, and we can search for jobs within our industry and kind of see, where do we think the salary should be for this job? If it's, let's say there's 1,000 different openings for a job and they're all within, I don't know, 30 miles of our company, we probably would be, we'd be able to use that to say, maybe we need to pay more. Maybe we need to offer more benefits to attract applicants to our specific company. Whereas if the inverse were true, imagine if we did a search and found that there's no one offering this particular job position within a 30-mile radius. Maybe we say, well, we don't really necessarily need to work as hard to bring in to bring in applicants. So certainly it's something that can be, used by the company. It's probably not necessarily the best thing if you're the job applicant and there's, only one job you can apply for. That's unfortunate, but that's how the market works. And then beyond that, we can also use it to sort applicants. So, LinkedIn and many other recruiting websites like that have lots of tools to allow us to quickly and efficiently kind of sort our applicants and kind of determine, do people meet the basic degree requirements? Do they meet our experience requirements? Whatever sort of requirements we set, we can use those sorts of tools to kind of allow us to better, or more efficiently rather, kind of obtain those applicants. So
what did you say onboarding was?
So onboarding is whenever you bring a new employee on. So like if I had a position and I hired someone, the onboarding process would be me kind of getting them going through things like company orientation, maybe basic job training, maybe like some sort of company information where I kind of tell them this is what our company is, this is our history. Basically just that kind of training period for a couple weeks.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So, oops, I got a little bit ahead of myself there. So let's kind of wrap things up today. We talked about social computing. We talked about some of the ways that firms may use it. We talked about some ways individuals may use it. We talked about various shopping things as well as marketing uses for it. Any questions? Well, I've got a couple questions for you all. So I've already got about 5 people who've gotten extra credit today, but that leaves some additional people. So I'd like to hear from you all. How should firms use social computing?
Well, obviously they should use it in terms of specifically business purposes and professional purposes, and to somehow make it personable to the market at which they are attributed to, but at the same time to handle it like a company and to use it as a method of trying to connect to customers and to the management and kind of make it more globalized in a sense.
Okay. Certainly is.
I was also going to say, like, with that, like he said, you can get closer to your customers, but you can also promote like their brands and stuff. Because, like, I mean, it's like enhancement customer relationship, because it allows like a business to follow public opinion about its brand, and respond quickly to a customer's issues or something they want to fix.
Okay. And Candace said by making sure their customers are aware of the things the company has to offer. Any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's just probably in this day and age, one of the best ways they can promote anything new or even older things that people might have forgotten about.
Yeah, so maybe the company has, some sort of product or service that no one's buying. That could certainly be something that, they could maybe remind people about. They could maybe see what people are saying. There's lots of different ways they could be used. Sydney says uses customer service and outreach. Yeah, great answers. Any other thoughts on this? All right, and here's my last question for the day. Can you think of a disaster that occurred with poor social media management? This is an open-ended question right here.
I think the coronavirus was a disaster that poor social media management occurred, because everyone made it out to be a joke on my Facebook page anyway in the beginning.
Okay. So having, sorts of unsubstantiated information. Any other thoughts on this? Any sorts of funny disasters? Any sorts of devastating disasters? Anything like that? I think some of the most, I wouldn't say the most damaging, but certainly it's pretty damaging if a company puts out inaccurate information on their social media page. Maybe they get their hours wrong. People show up and they're not open. That makes them upset. They mention a sale that's not actually, their legitimate sale. Any sort of information is inaccurate. And it doesn't even have to be intentionally inaccurate. Just any sort of that information can be pretty upsetting to people. So any other questions, thoughts, concerns here?